you approach something as monumental as Chrono Trigger for the first time? I've been playing games for over 30 years now, and I've consistently heard about how this game is the greatest RPG ever made, and one of the best games not only of its era, but literally ever made. This reputation always made me put off playing it, and it was something that was constantly on my mind as I was playing it for its 30th anniversary. After so many years of positive bias, how could I go into any experience with Chrono Trigger and treat it fairly, analyze it without the overwhelming weight of expectations placed upon it? That was the mindset with which I entered my first ever playthrough of Chrono Trigger. With 2025 being the game's 30th anniversary and with a second child on the way, it was play it now or keep delaying it. It was time to play the greatest game in my favorite genre. It was time to finally put my Chrono Trigger hesitation to rest once and for all. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who play them, and the memories made along the way. As always, I am your host. My name is Eric. I'd like to thank you so much for tuning in. Wherever, whenever, in time and space you may be located, it means so much that you are here with me, checking out what is going on with the Unlockables and what is going on in the world of video games. Before we dive into a monumental episode today, I would like to just take a moment to point you at the show Linktree, linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast, to find all of the Unlockables social media links to the show, links to the YouTube, all that good stuff. It would mean a lot to me if you would click on those links and follow on the various social media platforms of your choice. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. There's a link to the Discord in there. I'm trying to build up my YouTube channel, so you can go and subscribe to the Unlockables YouTube channel and the Unlockables podcast YouTube channel, where you can listen to the show on YouTube. So that is linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. The Patreon link is also in there. You could sign up for the Unlockables Patreon at either a $1 or $3 tier and be entitled to some extra goodies, like access to the Patreon specific channel in the Discord, and you will also get access to some extra goodies that I try to do from time to time, early episode releases and things of that nature. So once again, that is linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. With that housekeeping out of the way, it is time to finally dive in to one of the most anticipated games that I have ever played. Let's finally talk about Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a 1995 JRPG developed and published by Square. It is famously known for having a development team that is called the quote-unquote Dream Team, consisting of Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii, and Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama. It is widely considered amongst gamers and the gaming publications and the gaming populace as one of the greatest games of the fourth generation of consoles and one of the greatest games of all time. Chrono Trigger was released on March 11th, 1995 in Japan and August 11th, 1995 in North America. It was then ported and re-released on the PS1 on November 2nd, 1999 in Japan and June 29th, 2001 in North America. There would also be a Nintendo DS version released in 2008-2009 and a Windows version released in 2018, as well as smartphone versions in 2011 and 2012. I have some review scores here. It's going to be for the Super Nintendo version only. Game Rankings has it as a 96% aggregate. Out of 7,206 user ratings on Game FAQs, it is sitting at an average of 4.5 out of 5 stars, categorizing it as outstanding. Edge Magazine gave it a 7 out of 10. EGM a 37 out of 40. Famitsu a 34 out of 40. Game Informer a 9.25 out of 10. GamePro a 20 out of 20. At its end of year awards, EGM gave it its Best Super NES Game and Best Role-Playing Game award. GamePro gave it its Best RPG Game, and at the Nintendo Power Awards for that year, it won Best Super NES Game, Best Epic Game, Best Story, Best Ending, Coolest Transportation, and Worst Baddie. Chrono Trigger is constantly at or near the top of aggregate game lists, best RPGs, best JRPG lists, best game ever made lists, top 100s, you name it. Chrono Trigger is there and is very often at or near the top, within the top 5, within the top 10, within the top echelon of those lists. It sold 2 million copies in Japan in 2 months, making it the second highest selling game in Japan after Dragon Quest VI. To date, all versions of the game have sold about 5 million copies worldwide. Not bad for an old Super Nintendo JRPG. We'll start off as we normally do with my personal experience and personal thoughts here. My experience with RPGs is pretty well documented on this show. You've heard me say the story multiple times. Mario RPG, Final Fantasy IX, Kingdom Hearts, those are the ones that make up my lens through which I view RPGs. Considering that those series of games were like my first experience with RPGs, I missed a lot of the 16-bit era RPGs, and my only experience with them until recently was probably Breath of Fire 2. And that wasn't even the original Breath of Fire 2. It was Breath of Fire 2 that was re-released on the Game Boy Advance. I haven't done a ton of research on that game, but I'm assuming it was probably a little bit of a fixed-up port. I have beaten it. It was a really, really long time ago, and I don't really remember too much of it, but maybe that is a game in a series worth diving back into. I can't recall when I first heard of Chrono Trigger or where I was, how old I was, but I've been aware of it for a while now. I probably first heard about it when I got into content creation around games, which is getting close to be like 10 years ago now. So that is kind of, I assumed I was probably aware of its existence, knowing my love for Square, but I certainly know more about Square Enix, Final Fantasy now than I used to before I started content creation. But I didn't really start to hear it talked about the way it was until I really got into the conversation around video games with the current podcasting group that I kind of associate myself with. So that led to my knowledge about it before playing it for the first time this year, just being what I happened to kind of pick up through the zeitgeist, you know, the pretty standard stuff about Chrono Trigger. It's a time travel story. It has multiple endings. It was made by the creators of Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, and Dragon Ball. Those were the sort of things that I just knew about it off the top of my head that I feel is like the general base knowledge of anybody that knows anything about Chrono Trigger tends to know those things. Probably the best known fact is that it is made by those trio of creators, not just them by themselves. Obviously, there was a team of Square employees working on the thing, but that was like the headlining, right? It was like those three guys were like, oh my God, they're teaming up for a video game. That's absolutely insane. And, you know, Akira Toriyama and Yuji Horii have been working together on Dragon Quest for a number of years now, but for the rival game Final Fantasy, for Hironobu Sakaguchi to team up with them must have been kind of a crazy thing back then, because it was always the team's stated goal at Square to surpass Dragon Quest, and they would eventually do that once Final Fantasy VII came out. But this is still 1995. Final Fantasy VII is, I believe, 2 years still off into the future. So we're still dealing with like the wake of Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III if you lived in the States. But yeah, just again, going off on a tangent there, that's probably the best known thing is that it was made by those guys. One thing that I think did surprise me when I first kind of started digging into Chrono Trigger and understanding what it really was all about was just how overwhelmingly positive the conversation was around it. Like literally all the time. I can't recall very many times, if any, where any bad things were said about it in most of the conversations around it that I listened to. And not in terms of like, oh, I wish maybe it would have done this one thing better or that one thing better. Like, I think everybody has certain things like that about games where one or two things could be fixed. I mean, even my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy IX, Kingdom Hearts 2, there are things in there where I would go, yeah, I would maybe do that differently, or maybe if this got remade, or with the benefit of hindsight, maybe you fix this or tweak that can make it a little bit better of experience. So obviously takes like that are common amongst any games, but I don't remember even having like anybody come out of the woodwork just to kind of be like a hater. You know, like usually when things are positively universally acclaimed and loved, you have people that come out of the woodwork and are just like, nah, that thing's dumb, it sucks, just to like be a troll and get likes and clicks and stuff. For the most part, the conversation around this game is incredibly positive. It's like one of the more agreed upon games where everyone's just like, oh yeah, Chrono Trigger, that game is huge, that game's really important, that game is timeless, it's one of the most important games of its time. With that being the context around the game, I was obviously like, yeah, I have to play this if I'm a fan of RPGs and I'm trying to experience more of them. Why would I not play the one that is most universally assumed to be the greatest one ever made? And this actually made me nervous to play it for the first time because, like I said in my little intro spiel that I wrote, how do you approach something that has such high expectations on it and give it a fair shake? What conversation could I possibly have around it, given that the context of the conversations taking place is about how great the game is and how legendary the collaboration in its making was? Those things are well documented. Those things dominate the conversations. And there have been so many conversations had about Chrono Trigger. Most everybody I listen to in my podcast circle has done episodes on Chrono Trigger. So even if I was playing this game and wanted to talk about it, what more could I possibly say that hasn't already been said about, quote unquote, the greatest JRPG ever made? And something that I was even more afraid of was, what if I came to the other end of my playthrough and it fell short of heightened expectations? It didn't manage to cash that check that everyone was writing for it. What if it didn't clear the impossibly high bar that is obviously set for this game when you play it, because all you hear about it is, this is literally the greatest thing ever made. That's not me. That's not hyperbole. That's literally how a lot of people treat this game. People that played it when it first came out, people that played it years later. There seems to be a wide breadth across the discussion of video games that agree that this game is monumentally important, and that kind of puts it up on that pedestal alongside the other monumentally important games of that time, of that 90s period: Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, Final Fantasy 7. I would argue that it's in those conversations, even without me, in my opinion, like really affecting that conversation at all. Like, that conversation is being had by more than just me. So regardless of how I feel about it on this episode and on my upcoming YouTube piece that I wrote about it for the 30th anniversary and my first time playthrough, that's not going to move the needle. My episode here is not going to suddenly destroy the facade of Chrono Trigger and bring it crashing down to earth, right? That's just not going to happen. So that's kind of the mindset that I was going into this playthrough and writing down my thoughts on this episode. That was the mindset I had. So speaking of mindsets, though, what I do before every episode to get more community engagement, since my time for having guests on is limited, is I ask if people are able to, they record a WAV MP3, an audio file of themselves talking about their thoughts and their experiences of Chrono Trigger, and I challenge them to kind of put it into like a 3 to 5 minute format. So let's hear from the Unlockables community right now and see what they all had to say about Chrono Trigger.
Hello, this is Chris Copleen from the Retro Hangover podcast, and I guess it's time to talk about Chrono Trigger, which many people consider to be one of the best RPGs of all time. JRPG, RPG, who cares? And if you don't consider it one of the best RPGs of all time, you certainly consider it to probably be among the best RPGs on the Super Nintendo. This is a game that I go back with all the way to the time it came out. Not exactly when. I don't even remember how I heard about it. From one of my friends. I can't remember if it was at school or if it was with my friends that we spent New Year's every year in Wisconsin at. And I don't remember exactly how I first played it, whether I borrowed it or whether I received it as a gift. I knew it was still expensive at Funkoland. I know that much for sure. But what makes this game so special? It's just a combination of things. It has a special whimsical story of basic premise of good versus evil. A unyielding threat, something that you know is bad. Nothing complicated. There's no real motivation for this beast. It's just an evil creature. And I think that simplicity in storytelling, along with all the delightful characters that have pretty good development, all things being said, for a Super Nintendo game, make this a standout. And why wouldn't it be? It had two of the best directors for the genre of the time in Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yuji Horii behind the story, behind the game design, behind everything going on. And not to mention the fantastic soundtrack by Yasunori Mitsuda. It's one of the greatest just accomplishments or greatest events that you could see in video games, and I don't think you're going to have anything quite like that again for any single specific genre or any just game. If you look at the magnitude of what that was, specifically in the Japanese market, it's probably harder to comprehend for a lot of us Westerners, and it's only easy to kind of put this in perspective from a retrospective, because I would say the overwhelming, I would say almost all of us here in the West had no idea how big these two franchises were. Just everything about it, though. From start to finish, the pacing is fantastic. The battle system is fantastic. And just the overall atmosphere. You know, the things that happen to your protagonist. The sense of loss, the sense of grief, the sense of revival. There are so many things that just absolutely resonate with the player on so many different levels. And I don't, you know what, I'm gonna get to the point where I'm just repeating myself. Chrono Trigger is a special game, and if you're listening to this episode of the Unlockables, then you probably know that already. And if you don't like this game, I'd be genuinely curious as to why. Is this my favorite RPG of all time? No. Is it my favorite 16-bit RPG of all time? Also no. However, it's definitely in my top 5. It's way up there for me. This is one of the best ever made. That's just all I have to say about that. So thank you once again, Eric, for having me on Unlockables Radio, and have a great episode.
Hey everyone, this is Josh from the Still Loading Podcast. I'm here to talk about Chrono Trigger. You know, Chrono Trigger is an interesting game for me because it is a game that I did not experience growing up. It is something I came to much later in life. I played it on the recommendation of my friend Justin, who actually has been on my podcast a number of times, and I dabbled in it at first and enjoyed it quite a bit, but then I always lost interest, or I stopped playing it for one reason or another. And years later, I came back after I finally got an original copy, for the Super Nintendo. Paid $100 for it too, because this is like during the collector market, or it was in the aftermarket when games started becoming collectible. Now that thing is worth like $300, which is crazy. But in any case, so I got it a couple of years ago when it was much cheaper, and played the hell out of it. And I finally sat down after I got my copy of it and played it, and absolutely fell in love with it. And then I replayed it for my own show. I did an episode on this game last year where I played the DS version. And what's interesting about Chrono Trigger is that it's one of those rare instances where a game lives up to its hype. And I don't say that hyperbolically. I don't say that with any irony or trying to appease or appeal to the people who already love this game. like I said, I didn't have nostalgia for this, so I'm not coming at this from an angle of like, oh, I remember playing it when I was 10 years old and it stuck with me. No, I played this when I was like 26, right? Like a decade ago. I played this for the first time when I was like 26, and it still stuck with me. And I think what's special about Chrono Trigger is the fact that it has a very modern feeling combat system. It's something that feels way ahead of its time considering it came out in 1995. The combat system, I think, is one of the most interesting things about it. The tech system, how you can take abilities from different characters, and depending on which characters that you have, the tech's combined and you can do different things. One of my favorite examples of this is Luca has a fire attack and Chrono has his whirlwind attack, and you can combine the two to create a fire whirl attack. And the game really encourages you to experiment with different character combinations because you can have some really interesting tech combos. And tech is, for those who may not have played this already or played this before, it's kind of like your special moves or magic moves. It takes up your tech points, or kind of MP, for lack of a better term. And it's a really simple system, but it's a really effective system in encouraging you to try out new things and level up different characters, because you never know what you're going to be able to get. And it was also a game that was ahead of its time because there was no random battles. You can kind of, like, if you knew where the enemy placements were, you could dodge them, which is really new for the time. It really just holds up in so many different ways. It still looks gorgeous visually. I would talk about the soundtrack here, but let's be honest, man. Like, you really can't. Like, people are going to be gushing about the soundtrack this entire episode. It's one of the best out there. And the story is great, too. Like, this game just fires on all cylinders. And I think, but to wrap up my segment here, I would be remiss if I didn't dive into a little bit of the history of it, unless Eric has already dived into it on his episode here. But it is a miracle of a game because it was developed by the quote-unquote Dream Team. And what I mean by that is developers from different companies coming together to make this game. You had Squaresoft at the height of their Super Nintendo power. You had Enix at the height of their Super Nintendo power. You know, Enix made the Dragon Quest series. Squaresoft made Final Fantasy. And you had Yuji Horii and Akira Toriyama, who Akira Toriyama wasn't necessarily directly tied to Enix, other than the fact that he did the artwork for Dragon Quest, but I don't believe he was their employee. But even so, like, that's not something that Enix would normally, let slip by. So you have the director of Dragon Quest with Yuji Horii, the artist of Dragon Quest, the concept artist of Dragon Quest, Akira Toriyama. You had Hironobu Sakaguchi, the Gooch himself, the creator of Final Fantasy, working on this. And you have Yasunori Mitsuda, who was a newcomer at the time, but his soundtrack obviously is fantastic. He's one of the composers. And Nobuo Uematsu pitched in when Mitsuda literally gave himself stomach ulcers trying to create this game. So I'm already running long, and I apologize to your wonderful host over here for running a little bit too long, but Chrono Trigger rules. It is worth trying out at least once in your life, especially if you're an RPG fan. And it is a great beginner's RPG. If you are curious about getting into RPGs and you've never tried one before and you want to, this is honestly a really good one to start with. So yeah, this game rules. And my name is Josh. To wrap this up, my name is Josh. Once again, I'm the host of the Still Loading Podcast, a video game grab bag podcast that you can find on your podcast platforms, and you can follow me mainly on Blue Sky at stillloadingpodcast.com over on Blue Sky. Thanks again, Eric.
Hey, Unlockable fans, this is Poppy the Mask Keaton, and this is about my 10th time recording this, and it's changed over time. At this point, my thoughts on Chrono Trigger become an existential, am I the asshole? question. So, Chrono Trigger came out when I was in high school, and I was a crazy addict of RPGs at the time. Loved them all. Final Fantasy 3/6, favorite game. And so when Chrono Trigger was coming out, I was very excited for it. But my mom wanted to get me a class ring, and I didn't want a class ring. I didn't wear jewelry. I did not understand the significance of a class ring. I think it was kind of a holdover from her generation, when class rings were the thing, but it wasn't to me. And so I'm like, Mom, the cost of a class ring is the same as the cost of Chrono Trigger. We could just get this really cool RPG instead. She was like, no, you got to get the class ring. It's what high schoolers do. And so she got me this, it was a pretty expensive gift of a class ring, and we went to get it picked out, and I just shat all over it. The process guy's like, well, what do you want on the outside? Some people get their name, some people get da-da-da. I'm like, let's put my name on. He's like, all right. It's like, do you want an engraving on the inside? I'm like, all right. He's like, cool, what do you want? I'm like, well, this advertisement shows somebody's name on there. We'll put my name on the inside, too. And the guy was like, so people are just going to know who this class ring belongs to? I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay. So instead of getting this like cool kind of unique gift, I was really pissy about the class ring because it wasn't Chrono Trigger. And yeah, so that's my experiences. I've tied not playing Chrono Trigger when it came out to getting this class ring. I don't know if they're that intrinsically tied or not. And I don't know why I didn't just buy Chrono Trigger with my own money. I sound like an entitled asshole. And maybe I was. I don't know. But yeah, so that's my Chrono Trigger experiences. I didn't get to play it until college on an emulator. And I don't have that many memories of it because, man, I was just burning through games. And so much was going on at college. Like, it would have been so much cooler for me to just sit at home and play it after work. Really get to soak it in. Or after work, after school, whatever. You know, it's high school. I had a job in high school. Like I said, I could have bought the thing. I don't know. But that's my Chrono Trigger experience. Eric, that's my Chrono Trigger story. Is I didn't get Chrono Trigger. I got a class ring instead. And now I think, like, maybe I was a dick about the way that was being handled. Anyway, it's the story of the games that we played along the way. Bye, y'all. Thanks for listening.
Hello, Eric. It's me, Thrak. You may know me as Thrak from... What was that thing we were doing? Never mind that. So, Chrono Trigger, eh? The Chrono Trigger with a hard R. Yeah, Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a fantastic RPG. I would argue it is in like the top 10, I guess, like objective all time, because it's just known for being such a almost kind of perfect RPG. It seeks to tackle all of the issues JRPGs had had up to that point and found a way to streamline everything and make it really the kind of the best version of JRPGs at that time. And it's a shame that like Final Fantasy VII became sort of the template for everybody to use, where I think Chrono Trigger was kind of meant to be that template, but it just didn't work out that way, huh? So yeah, it's really fucking good, and I hope y'all really enjoy it. If you want more details, you can listen to my A Novel Console with Chris, where we talked about Chrono Trigger. If you want to hear Baby Thrak with a worse mic and maybe worse opinions, I don't know. But yeah, go check that out, and hope you all enjoy the episode. Love you!
Hello, Unlockables listeners. It's Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog, here to do something that no white man with a microphone has ever done before. That's right, I'm going to tell you how I feel about Chrono Trigger. Now, I missed Chrono Trigger when it came out. I didn't have a Super Nintendo, and I had basically an entire lifetime or, 20 years or so before I actually played the game. But during that time, I was constantly hearing from friends about how great Chrono Trigger is. And it's like, well, you like this RPG? Just wait till you play Chrono Trigger. Oh, Final Fantasy VI, you love that? I know you're going to love Chrono Trigger. So it was really, really built up in my head until I played it for the first time in 2022, I believe. And I played the DS version. It's the only version of the game I've ever played. And I gotta say, Chrono Trigger is pretty good. Now, I say pretty good. It's not my favorite RPG of the era. That's still Final Fantasy VI. And there are certain things that, I don't love about Chrono Trigger. The story didn't do a whole lot for me. There are certain characters who I liked a lot. And I like the villain. I love Lavos as a concept. Give me a cosmic horror villain in an RPG. I love that. but there's certain stuff, I don't love Chrono, for example. I feel like your player insert character should be somebody that you can connect with. I couldn't really do that. So there are some things in the story that didn't do a whole lot for me, but there's a ton else that I really, really respect about the game. I love the music, of course. I love the way the game looks. This game will never look old. The music will always sound amazing. I like the combat system. I got to be pretty good at it, and I had a good time figuring out the best way to do it. And more as I learn about, the people involved in the creation of Chrono Trigger, it kind of feels like a miracle that they didn't kill each other in the process of making the game, because you have a bunch of big egos, big creatives all working on this thing together. And, lest we forget how difficult it is to make a video game when everybody is perfectly in sync, it feels like they just kind of caught lightning in a bottle here with all of these big personalities working in the same direction. And if there were conflicts, if there were difficulties, it sure as hell doesn't show in the final product. So that kind of feels like a miracle to me. I mean, how many super groups have we heard in music that get together and you're like, oh, sweet, I love this artist, I love this musician, I love this guitar player, I love this drummer. They're all doing an album together, and the album comes out, and it's like, it's okay, but I'll never listen to that album again. And I don't get that feeling about Chrono Trigger. I think that this game is pretty good. I had a good time playing it. It didn't really live up to the hype, but the hype was so high that I almost don't know how it could have. So that's not me disparaging Chrono Trigger as a game. That is me coming to it after hearing about it for literally 20 years before I finally got a chance to play it. So I'll probably revisit Chrono Trigger somewhere down the line. But for now, you have Eric and the other people who submitted their recordings about Chrono Trigger for those other perspectives. I thank you for listening to mine. My name is Dave Jackson. Once again, I'm the host of Tales from the Backlog. On Tales from the Backlog, each week is a critical discussion, usually about 2.5 hours, about one game per episode. I do have an episode about Chrono Trigger if you're looking for a long discussion, once you're finished with this episode, of course, but I also have almost 200 other games on the feed at this point, with no spoilers in each episode for a while, so anyone can listen to any episode at least for about an hour or so. So that is Tales from the Backlog. My name is Dave Jackson once again. Eric, thank you for letting me do this. As always, I will go down back into the crawl space now. Just let me know when it's time for another one. See ya!
Hi, folks. Matty K. Stormageddon here, podcaster and nerd, host of the Funny Games podcast and Reignite. I'm here to talk very briefly about my favorite game of all time. That's right, Chrono Trigger is my number one game of all time. It has been since the day I played it and continues to be to this day. Is it a perfect game? No. I might argue that it is for what I want out of a video game, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is universal. I can see why people bounce off this game in a modern era, but I do really truly believe it holds up and stands against the test of time. It is a seminal game for me as far as storytelling, music, combat mechanics, world building, kind of the whole nine yards, and is endlessly impactful to both my taste in video games and how I consume stories. I think the narrative arcs of this game are some of the strongest in video games, full stop. What I can say definitively is it definitely has one of the best soundtracks in video game history, without a doubt, composed, of course, by primarily the legendary Yoshinori Mitsuda. Yeah, I mean, I could ramble on forever about this game, and I don't want to do that to Eric or the Unlockables listening audience. But what I will say is, while lots of folks tout this as the best RPG ever made, and again, up for debate, definitely is for me, I think as objectivity is not really why I listen to podcasts like the Unlockables. It is the subjectivity. It is how we take our personal stories into why we love games. I felt it important to talk about this. Also, of course, all the art for the game and a lot of art within the game as well, designed by the now late Akira Toriyama, who is also a legend to me, and I've loved Dragon Ball Z, Chrono Trigger, and the Dragon Quest series for a long time, though the first two from playing and the third from a distance, though I am starting to play the Dragon Quest games now. But yeah, to wrap up, I think Chrono Trigger is one of the strongest RPGs ever made, one of the most impactful video games ever to be created, And I'm so grateful for Eric to give me this platform to share a little bit of my love for it. If you want to hear me talk more about this podcast, a very brief plug, for one of the anniversary episodes of SideQuest, myself, Chrono Katie, and Jeff talked at length about Chrono Trigger. And so if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts, you can go there, or basically look up any other podcast with a Chrono Trigger episode, and odds are I'm lurking there somewhere beneath. But yeah, Chrono Trigger, definitely one of the greatest RPGs ever made, and I'm so glad that Eric is playing and talking about it. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your time in recording yourself and putting your thoughts and being a part of the episode. It really means a lot to me that you all out there take the time to do that, to be able to continue to collaborate with me, even though I can't record full guest episodes like I would like to. So thank you guys so much. I hope that some of those thoughts were enlightening to you before we move on to the rest of this episode. Speaking of moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about the history and development of Chrono Trigger, and this is mostly just to kind of step back and highlight, once again, one of the best known facts about this game, right? The Dream Team, Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama, Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, and Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii. In case, maybe if you're younger, maybe if you don't really have the context for who that is, certainly if you were born after the year 2000, you were not alive when Sakaguchi was making Final Fantasy games. You were not alive during the golden age of when Dragon Ball Z came over from Japan. So let me just put some of that in context for you, right? Dragon Quest is so popular in Japan, it is considered the national game of Japan. It is the representative of the Japanese video game industry in a space that features Nintendo and Mario and Pokemon. It's not those that are the national game of Japan. It is Dragon Quest. When Dragon Quest III was released, over 300 children were arrested for skipping school. There's even this urban myth that goes around where it goes that the Japanese government banned the release of Dragon Quest games during the week due to productivity dips. Dragon Ball Z, like I mentioned, would begin airing in America in 1996, but both it and its predecessor Dragon Ball had been airing in Japan since 1986, and Dragon Ball Z would finish its run in 1996, just as it was starting to air in America. I don't think anybody here would argue with the legacy of Dragon Ball. Its legacy is enormous. Hundreds of millions of manga issues sold. It's aired in over 80 countries. And while anime was first introduced to America as far back as the 60s, I really kind of think it exploded in popularity in the 90s with things like Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, Pokemon, and many other things, especially with the help of programming like Toonami. And while I'm not one of the ardent Dragon Ball defenders, I grew up watching Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. It holds a very special place to my heart. I am willing to admit that the level and scale and storytelling of anime these days has certainly surpassed Dragon Ball. I think Dragon Ball is foundational, at least in the West, for how a lot of us, people in their 30s going to their 40s view anime growing up. Like Dragon Ball Z was anime, unless you were into the really, really deep stuff. I remember on Toonami there was like Yu Yu Hakusho and Rurouni Kenshin. Cowboy Bebop was on, I think, later, like Adult Swim. So there was other anime stuff, but I very clearly remembered, at least during my childhood with my friends, Dragon Ball Z was the big show. And last but certainly not least, Final Fantasy is arguably the most popular, at least most well-known RPG series in the world, even today. And while they hadn't quite gained the foothold in North America they had when Final Fantasy VII would come out, that tidal wave was certainly coming. There are obviously 16 mainline games in the anthology. Final Fantasy boasts dozens and dozens of sequels, spin-offs, games that bear the Final Fantasy branding. Although Dragon Quest still seems to have a larger cultural impact in its home country than Final Fantasy has gained more worldwide appeal and popularity, especially with the release. Like once Final Fantasy VII released, Square had captured the Western market, something that I feel like Dragon Quest still hasn't really managed to do to the same level as like peak Final Fantasy did. So that's what we're dealing with. The creators, people that had a hand in like these 3 cultural touchstones, at least in Japan, and 2 of which would eventually come over to America and become very, very well known in cultural touchstones in America. That's who made this game. Now, those 3 wouldn't be the only. Obviously, there was a team of 60 Square employees in addition to the direction and creation of all the elements by the big 3. So Square provided the manpower for this game to be made. So you could argue that it was technically a Square game, but they did all work together. And the rest of the team is honestly a who's who of people you'd be familiar with if you're a big fan of Square or JRPGs. Obviously, we had Toriyama, Sakaguchi, and Hori. The whole idea came together. They were in the US together researching like computer graphics, and this is kind of where Sakaguchi and his team were starting to gear up for this idea of Final Fantasy VII. And while they were all there at like this graphics conference, this researching computer graphics to go on all these tours and stuff, that's where the idea to make a game together like started to form. They saw, hey, this is maybe an opportunity that we could pull this off before this big leap to 3D. Kazuhiko Aoki offered to produce on Chrono Trigger and is ultimately credited with kind of bringing all those guys together and getting the project off the ground. Yoshinori Kitase would direct. Obviously, he's known for Final Fantasy VII. He worked on Final Fantasy V and VI before this, alongside Takashi Tokita. Final Fantasy IV and Live Alive is what he's known for, and Akihiko Matsui, Final Fantasy IV and V as well. Yasunori Mitsuda would be responsible for a bulk of the music that was created. Mitsuda was actually a sound effects designer for a couple years when he first joined on with Square, which was in 1992, so he would have had 3-ish years of experience at this time. And he told Sakaguchi that he was going to quit unless he was able to design music for games, which led him getting assigned to Chrono Trigger. Mitsuda seems like he was kind of an insane person when it came to work. He would work until he passed out. He would wake up in the middle of the night and start composing if he had like an idea for a song. He slept in the office, and eventually, because of this lifestyle, he developed stomach ulcers and ended up hospitalized, which would bring in the legendary Nobuo Uematsu. He would step in to help finish the project on the musical side. Well, Mitsuda recovered. There's even one story about Yasunori Mitsuda. One time his hard drive crashed and he lost like 40 songs worth of progress that he had to basically redo. So this was truly like a labor of love for Yasunori Mitsuda, and also very bold for, I mean, looking it up, he was not very old. He was fresh out of school. He was a younger guy in his 20s when he first designed this soundtrack, and going to Sakaguchi, the legendary creator of Final Fantasy, and being like, hey, I'll just quit if you don't let me compose. Quite ballsy on Mitsuda's part, but he obviously believed in his skill, and I think it definitely shows the passion that he poured into this project, because Chrono Trigger's soundtrack is incredible. Yuji Horii would come up with the story and the themes of time travel. He influenced a large part of that story. My boy, Tetsuya Nomura, mentioned worked on field graphics. I assume that at the time he was probably gearing up to work at Final Fantasy VII. Obviously, he worked on 6 and 5 as well, but Tetsuya Nomura, involved in Chrono Trigger, worked on field graphics. Praise be to our patron saint of this show, Tetsuya Nomura. So let's start talking about some of the elements of the game here. And I think when I talk about the Super Nintendo, the first thing I like to mention is the artwork. I think the Super Nintendo has a very distinct, like, pixel sprite-based art style, except for some of the more advanced games like your Donkey Kong Countries and your Star Foxes and things like that. But I think anybody kind of looking at Super Nintendo pixel style artwork, anybody that kind of grew up with it or has extensive experience with it, knows it is very like distinct in its style, and Chrono Trigger is no different. It features stunning Super Nintendo pixel artwork. This is my first game on the show, and probably my first game playing, period, that featured the art style of Yuji Horii and Akira Toriyama. Obviously, Toriyama having a very, very distinct art style when it comes to Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest, the way his characters have spiky hair and like sharply defined features and kind of like the square eyes that are kind of slanted. All that stuff is hallmark of Toriyama artwork. And the thing that kind of caught me off guard was how the Super Nintendo sprites and the pixel artwork so brilliantly captured Toriyama's iconic animation style. You can see the style in the incredible animated cutscenes. I'm not saying it's like a one-to-one thing where you would look at the sprite and just automatically be able to assume, oh, yeah, like that's like based on a character from Akira Toriyama. But I think when you look at the sprite and the artwork in the context of seeing some of the hand-drawn artwork that Toriyama did, I think you can look at it and go, oh yeah, that's probably like the best representation of what an Akira Toriyama character could look like on screen, given the technology that they were working with. And I think this is incredibly appropriate considering that Sakaguchi described the creative process of making the game, you know, him and a lot of his team doing like the actual programming and making, executing of the vision laid down by Yuji Horii and Akira Toriyama. He described this creative process as getting to play around in one of Toriyama's worlds. And you only get to play around in one of Toriyama's worlds if you have artwork and assets created by Toriyama himself defining what that world is. So what an incredible feeling that must be to have somebody like Toriyama creating these characters in this world, and Sakaguchi's just like, yeah, it's incredible because we just get to play around in one of his worlds. I mean, you had to think that, I mean, Enix clearly thought highly enough of Akira Toriyama's work that they wanted to partner with him, and him and Yuji Horii started doing Dragon Quest. And I guarantee you, I mean, I feel like Dragon Ball was probably inescapable in the 80s in Japan as much as anything else. So I don't know if like Sakaguchi and Toriyama had like a relationship, but I'm assuming they had to have probably been aware of one another, considering how celebrated video games are as part of Japanese culture. The colors are super bright and vibrant. Everything and everyone is easily identifiable and distinguished from one another. And I think this is crucial to Chrono Trigger's diverse cast. And I think it's impressive to maintain this art direction and consistency across the game's different time periods. And what I mean by that is to like keep them distinct enough from one another, but also make them feel similar across the scope of the game. So what I mean by that is like when you have to account for like going to the prehistoric age or the futuristic age, which is like more robotic, or the medieval age and everything in between. So for Toriyama to be able to kind of keep that consistency across the scale of time that the game is telling its story and the player is playing is pretty impressive, because you think of different elements. I mean, doing something like a story in a prehistoric setting is completely different than doing something set in a futuristic time period where there are robots versus cavemen and dinosaurs and things of that nature. So it's super obvious that when it came to the graphics and the environment and the setting that the story was taking place in, that everyone was pretty all on the same page. And Toriyama's world that he kind of created was kind of the binding thread that made the game feel like it was all part of the same game, but distinct enough to sell the illusion that you were traveling to different periods throughout time. I touched on music and audio a little bit when I talked about Yasunori Mitsuda. I'm just going to like gush here a little bit about this because Mitsuda's soundtrack it's perfect. There are very few soundtracks that I've ever listened to and gone, yeah, that soundtrack is like quintessentially for that game. It is definitive. It's one of those examples where the music matches the game so well that it's just so synonymous. And what I mean by that is video game music has gone more of like the orchestration route. Composers and compositions for video games will utilize kind of like the same like big bombastic orchestral feel to them, especially if they are like very cinematic, very high-end AAA games that will all employ larger orchestras. and they all kind of sound samey, even though like some will have clearly identifiable songs and themes. Chrono Trigger is so unique in its utilization of the Super Nintendo sound chip. It's just the songs to this day are still stuck in my head, and I played this game like 6 months ago. The sense of music really pervades the entire game with the use of, its leitmotif, the iconic Chrono Trigger theme, and I think this helps give the game a consistent tone across the entire playtime. I did write it down in my notes. Mitsuda would have been 23 years old at the time of composing the soundtrack for his first game. So when Mitsuda was 23 years old, he was composing the soundtrack to one of the most iconic RPGs ever made, and I was just getting out of college and starting my career. And through his composition, his goal was to create music that didn't fit into any established genre of video game. He wanted music that would be appropriate for an imaginary world. The soundtrack he came up with was unprecedented at the time in terms of its size and its scope. During the commercial pressing in 95 after the game was released, it spanned 3 discs. Disc storage space has gotten a lot better over the years, but that was a lot back then. Don't you remember the old Final Fantasy games on PS1 were like on 4 discs? So to have 3 discs of music is absolutely insane. There's so many tracks from the score that I have stuck in my head constantly to this day. Peaceful Days, Wind Scene, the battle theme, Frog's theme, Robo's theme, Corridors of Time, which might be my absolute favorite song on the entire soundtrack. Brink of Time, the battle with Magus. Magus? Magus. I don't know how you say it. I've heard it say Magus, Magus, and Magus. So I don't know what in terms of doing the research, I've heard all 3 as I've watched other people talk about this game, so I don't know which one is technically accurate. So I'm just going to go with Magus. That's the easiest to me. I don't think Mitsuda would peak with his creation of the Chrono Trigger soundtrack, although I would say it's probably his most iconic work. He would go on to do so many more incredible things. The list of games he's worked on is extensive, and he's worked on 2 of my other favorite games in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. If you don't know anything about Xenoblade Chronicles in general, go and listen to the soundtrack. The soundtrack for all the Xenoblade games is fucking insane and awesome and amazing, and it's stuff you can just like throw on in the background. Like there's great background music, there's great battle soundtracks, like there's like roaring guitars, there's more subdued instruments. It's incredible. Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade 3. Some of my favorite soundtracks in all of games. So yeah, Yasunori Mitsuda knocked it out of the park. It's an incredible soundtrack. It's so quintessentially Chrono Trigger, and I think it's one of the most iconic soundtracks of its time. In terms of the gameplay and narrative, the cast is pretty unique. They all distinguish themselves from one another, and it's still a cast that I remember pretty fondly to this day, having only played it 6 months ago. But all the characters are unique. They all have different abilities. They all have very unique sprites and artwork, so they easily stand out from one another. One of the criticisms about Final Fantasy is that their parties have become like too samey. Like the parties are mostly comprised of human characters now, which when I start to look back on it, I go, oh yeah, like there are a lot of human characters in Final Fantasy games nowadays. I think all the characters in 12 are human. I think, with the exception of Fran, but she is still like a humanoid like figure. I think all the characters in 13 are humanoid. 15 they definitely are. 16 is just Clive, and 7 Remake and Rebirth brings it back because you have Red 13 and Kate Sith and all that stuff. And Final Fantasy VIII, I believe all the characters are humanoid, but Final Fantasy used to have like the non-humanoid characters and black mages. And when I think of a diverse Final Fantasy cast, I think of Final Fantasy IX, and I think Chrono Trigger's cast is diverse in the same way that 9's cast is diverse. I mean, you've got a couple of human characters in there, right? You have Chrono, you have Marl, you have Luca, but then you have Frog, who's literally a frog. You have Robo, who's literally a robot. I know, named a little bit on the nose there. You can get Magus to join your party. Ayla is a human as well, but she's prehistoric. So there's some like non-human elemental, and I guess Magus could be considered a human character too, but he's kind of like a weird, like brooding vampire kind of guy. So I don't know. He's towing the line. But the point I'm trying to make is that I felt like the cast was unique. They all distinguish themselves from one another. The way in which you play the game is, I found, pretty standard for an RPG. There was nothing that kind of like blew me out of the water in terms of gameplay, in terms of things that you would normally do in an RPG, right? You have towns, you have an overworld, you have battles, you have side quests, you have purchasing items, etc. If you have played RPGs before, you know what you are getting into with it, basically. I mean, you're going to be traversing the overworld, you're going to be visiting towns, buying equipment, battling, all that kind of stuff. I would say that the big departure from RPGs that I've played is that there are no random encounters on the overworld. All of the encounters are in areas that you go into. Like, you walk across the overworld to a forest, go in a forest, and there'll be enemies inside the forest. And the unique thing about this is it doesn't transition to a separate battle screen. If you run into the enemy, you start the encounter and the battle takes place right where you run in the enemy to. So I think maybe in terms of that aspect of it, that might be something that is unique from it. But I haven't played a lot of RPGs from this era, so I would feel ignorant just making that claim and being like, oh yeah, it does this differently than all those. The thing that Chrono Trigger obviously does hang its hat on that is kind of different and unique is time travel as both a gameplay and a narrative mechanic. And this is interesting because narratively it's risky to do time travel, right? Time travel can come off as lazy if you don't do it right. Time travel is a device that you can use, and if you're not careful with it, it can be used to just kind of undo a lot of mistakes that characters make, and if you overdo it too much, you can make it feel like the world doesn't have any stakes, or it can undo a lot of the stuff that maybe you set up before narratively. One of the things that kind of rubs me the wrong way about time travel, and I spoke about time travel at length in another game recently, Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, and in that game, time travel is used to kind of bring back all these characters from the past so that Nomura could use them in the final confrontation in Kingdom Hearts 3. And while I think that it delivers a satisfying conclusion, you can hear all my thoughts about this in the Guiding Keys series, what Dream Drop Distance does is kind of undercut a lot of the really brilliant storytelling that takes place earlier in the series, especially Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, by kind of undoing those things and bringing characters forward that you thought you were done with and reintroducing them into the narrative. It kind of cheapens the emotional impact of the moments that you have with those characters in earlier games. So this can be something that you can do if you kind of abuse time travel as a narrative device. But what you could do is largely ignore a lot of the paradoxical questions that come along with time travel, and it works just fine, surprisingly. That was one of the things that I was worried about going into Chrono Trigger. I just thought, oh, all this jumping across time stuff is going to be like so confusing. And what if you jump here and do this thing and kick that rock, and then it creates a butterfly effect, and then a paradox opens a black hole and it just consumes the whole world. Turns out, if you just like don't give a fuck about any of those consequences, then in terms of the narrative and the gameplay, it's actually a really brilliant addition. Jumping back and forth between time periods works wonderfully for the narrative, and it has gameplay implications as you're presented with different challenges and puzzles depending on the time period you're in. It also kind of helps to easily segment the game into different parts depending on where you are in time, like what time period you're in, at least till the game kind of opens up near the end. And that was another thing that I was really worried about going into Chrono Trigger, because I was like, man, if there's all this time travel and jumping around, like how am I ever going to keep track of where I'm supposed to go, what I'm doing? What if I miss something in that time period and it fucks me up further down the line in this time period or whatever? It doesn't really do that. It largely kind of keeps you in the time periods that you need to be in with limited opportunity to move around, at least in the early game, until you reach a point later in the game and it kind of opens up to you and is like, all right, you have the resources and the ability to move anywhere in time that you need to. And what this does is it allows for there to be a lot of puzzles that require trips across time to solve. You have to go back to this time period and talk to this person. You have to leave an item in that time period, and that will help you give you something that you need in the time period where you have to solve the puzzle. All that's quite clever, and it gives you an excuse to jump around and explore, and it utilizes all of the maps across the different ages in different amounts to like help you solve those puzzles. So it's a really clever use of all reusing those map assets and having to use your brain to think across all the different time periods based on like what characters are telling you. Like there's one quest, I believe it's Luca's quest, a side quest near the end, where you need to get an item called the Sunstone and charge it, but it hasn't been in the sun so long, so it's just turned into like an innate like rock or moonstone or something like that. So you get the Sunstone, you take it back to the Cave of the Sun in like prehistoric times in like 65 million BC. You leave it in the sun so that when you travel forward to the time to the future, you then go and get it, and it's been sitting in the sun for millions of years and it's charged up. So puzzles like that. And that's a really unique use of that time travel system that I didn't really consider how well that would work until I had actually played it. So the narrative and the gameplay really kind of laid a lot of my fears that I had about the game to rest just by being as good as it was. Battle system is pretty good. Having played Final Fantasy games, I was familiar with the active time battle system. So it wasn't anything that was a huge adjustment. Battles were really quick and snappy compared to especially my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy IX. Usually over in under a minute, within 30 seconds. You have magic, you have attacks, and you have techs that you can do. Double and triple techs are team-up attacks that require 2 or 3 party members. They're very powerful. The upside of using a double or triple tech with your party members is that there's a lot of damage. The downside of it is that it takes multiple party members' turns. So if I have Chrono and I have Luca and I want them to do a double tech together, like there's a double tech where Chrono like swings his sword around, hits a bunch of guys in an arc, and like Luca like sets them on fire, so it does like fire AoE damage, right? It takes both of their turns in the active time battle system to pull that off. So leaving you with less options, but you get a lot of AoE damage, if that makes sense. This is cool because I think it encourages experimentation with the other party members to see what different tech combinations there are. Usually I fall into the trap of once I find a party that I like, whether I like their playstyle or their moves, or I just like them narratively as a character, I'll just stick with that party for like the entire playthrough unless it forces me to switch. But with the tech system, I was curious. I wanted to see a lot of what the other techs were. And so I found that natural curiosity led me to swap up characters more often and try different things at different points in the game just to kind of keep it fresh. Regular battles aren't that difficult, but boss battles are more like puzzles. They're kind of like a test of your knowledge of the game and your ability to pay attention to patterns and information. A lot of bosses will have specific weaknesses. A lot of bosses will have a certain order that you have to defeat certain body parts in. A lot of bosses will have regenerating body parts that if you don't take out those body parts, it'll allow the boss to do like some kind of giant high damaging AoE attack. So it's kind of, the boss fights are kind of like this dance of managing your abilities and managing monster parts and preparing for when the boss does this move or that move. They're definitely certainly more in depth than just your regular enemy encounters. And I think the boss fights do a lot better job of showcasing some of the hidden depth that might not be so obvious if you're just fighting regular enemies. That depth and strategy, I think, shows itself a lot better in some of these more challenging boss fights. And I made mention a little bit ago about how there are no random encounters on the overworld. They're just encounters in the spaces that you go into. And so you go into a named location and there are encounters in there. One thing that surprised me about Chrono Trigger was how wonderfully paced it was, how efficient it was with every kind of moment you spent with it. Like I said back when, I said earlier in the episode that I didn't feel like I had to ever stop and grind for levels to get past a part. I never got stuck to the point where I felt like grinding was the solution. I found that by just fighting the enemies that came along naturally as I was progressing down the main quest line, kept me at a high enough level. It kept me perfectly where like the game wanted me to be. It felt like it was very, very well paced in that regard. I was never underleveled severely to the point where I couldn't survive a boss fight with a little bit of quick thinking or anything like that. I felt like I was always right at the level. I was always where I needed to be at the time when the game wanted me to be there, if that makes sense. It's very efficient in that way in telling you the story, moving you along in the plot. And that only really stops if you kind of stop to explore some of the different time periods. And that really opens up towards the end of the game when you get a vehicle that allows you to travel to different time periods and basically fly wherever you want to get to, right? The standard JRPG trope of getting the airship, and that's when the entire world is available for you to explore. One of the things that surprised me the most was this idea of being able to finish the game at any time, how there are multiple endings depending on when you want to finish the game. That feels like a very modern and very innovative concept to me. And even now, I wouldn't say that there are many games out there that would just let you complete and finish the game whenever you want. Breath of the Wild kind of introduced that concept to where it heavily encourages you to not run straight to the castle and fight Calamity Ganon, but you are more than welcome to, and people, of course, do that, just run there and fight them and not play any of the games. So this idea of just being able to finish the game whenever and engage with it as much as you want feels very innovative. And the way that you accomplish this is you always have a portal at a place known as the End of Time that you can go and fight the big bad of the game. You can go and fight Lavos because he's fixed in a very specific time period. You can always go there and fight him basically whenever you feel ready, and you get different endings depending on what has occurred in the game. I would caution against this because I think to get to some of Chrono Trigger's better content, its better moments, I think you have to continue to follow the breadcrumbs and follow the story that the game kind of lays out for you. Because there comes a time, like at the beginning of this game, despite having time travel, is pretty linear. It keeps you on a pretty consistent path moving forward through the narrative until you get to a point where it kind of lets the guardrails off of you, and it gives you like a bunch of side quests to do for all the different characters to get better gear for like the final dungeon and the final fight with Lavos. And those side quests are really good. That content is really great. You would miss that content if you just decided to end the game like halfway through. That moment in the game specifically, where you're kind of let loose to figure out all these side quests and explore the world fully at your leisure, is one of its strongest points. I talk about this in my upcoming YouTube essay that should release same month as this, some couple weeks later, and I go into more in depth about the way that the narrative works. And I'll just give you a little bit of my snippets, a little bit of my thoughts here, because I'm saving a lot more of my in-depth analysis for my written essays. But Chrono Trigger almost feels like a game that has two halves. In the first half, you have this very linear narrative experience that, yes, there are time portals that allow you to go back and forth between the different time periods, but it's not completely free. There aren't completely no training wheels. It kind of keeps you on. It's very easy to keep you on the main quest narrative and keep moving forward. And there are a lot of themes in that first part of the game that kind of deal with the game's overall main theme of fate and can you change the future and should you, and all this other kinds of questions that the game kind of asks you. The answer to that in that first part of the game is surprising and interesting. And the second half of the game, where it kind of opens up, is almost polar opposite of the first, where you're going wherever you want, where you're doing side quests for characters, where you're interacting more with the world, and things kind of start to shift in the character's favor. I think that second portion of the game is a really nice antithesis to what you play in the first portion of the game, and the questions and the answers that you kind of get playing through that first portion, if that makes sense. If you guys have played it, I think you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about. Just tune in a couple weeks from now when you see the YouTube episode go live, and I break down that concept a little more, because I think that main premise of Chrono Trigger being this game that has kind of two halves is kind of the main premise around which the entire game kind of spins around. And that's at least how I feel, because I found things the game was trying to tell me in each of the separate halves, in each of the separate portions of the game. I found the answers to be different, but I found the message to be incredibly heartwarming. And again, go check out that video, because I wrote like 15 pages and I break it down way more. So never in my time during my playthrough of Chrono Trigger, and I guess this kind of gets to the point of meeting expectations and clearing the high bar that the hype around this game set, right? After I finished it, and I made sure I had a little bit of a help of a guide, because I wanted to experience everything. If I was going to play Chrono Trigger for the 30th anniversary for the first time, I wanted to play it fully all the way through to the end and get like the final ending of having like done everything. And I did that. I don't want to sit up here and just start extolling the game and giving it the praise and the platitudes that it probably rightly deserves, because you can listen to any number of shows and just listen to them saying, yeah, it's the greatest thing ever. It's the greatest game of all time. I think I've done a pretty good job in laying out the reasons why I really liked it, if you couldn't tell. But I think what I can say, and what I think is the hallmark of a really great game, and something that I've experienced not very often, is there wasn't a single time during my entire playthrough where I felt annoyed, where I felt something could have been done better in hindsight, where I could go, oh, maybe if they would have tried this or done that, or with the benefit of modern technology, you could do this or something of that nature. Never, not one time. And this is incredible to me, because there are things in my favorite games of all time that annoy me or cause me to criticize them. For example, Atlantica in Kingdom Hearts 2 is the absolute worst. They could just toss that world in the trash and nobody would miss it at all. Final Fantasy IX is a bit slow when it comes to combat and its presentation, and I really don't like Tetramaster, which is the card game. And Chocobo Hot and Cold can be a little bit tedious if you're trying to complete that whole like Chocobo side quest. So there are things in those two games, which are my two favorite games of all time, I can point to and go, yeah, this could probably be better, or, you know, this is just something that the game has shown its age and that's just how it was back then. But it's something that annoys me. There are parts in every playthrough of Kingdom Hearts 2, especially when I have to go into Atlantica, where I'm just annoyed, right? Or I'm just like, oh man, like I really don't enjoy this specific aspect of my favorite game of all time. Chrono Trigger was just good. I enjoyed it from start to finish. I enjoyed the ride that it took me on. I surrendered myself and allowed it to just take me on that ride. And I just come out the other end saying, yeah, this is good. I don't really have any criticisms as to how it could be better, in the same way that I have criticisms about two of my favorite games of all time. I honestly don't. Every moment I spent with it was enjoyable. I loved it. It was great. It was a completely fulfilling experience from beginning to end, where I never had any negative emotions, even when there were times that I stumbled, if I lost against a boss or I felt like I was lost for a minute. I just engaged with the world and I figured out where I was supposed to go and how to defeat the boss. And yeah, I think the game tells you everything that you need to know to be successful at it. And you don't have to feel overwhelmed the way I did about the narrative or the time travel or the multiple endings, or afraid of missing this ending or that ending. I would encourage you that if you still have not played Chrono Trigger, to just engage with it. And yes, even go into the second part of the game and get a guide and just get some help, maybe with some of those side quests if you feel stuck on it, and just experience it fully, because there are some really touching narrative moments in that second half of the game that really kind of caused me to choke up and really kind of blew my mind in their presentation and the themes that they were trying to tell me overall. So to close this out, I'm sure this episode is well over an hour, especially after I've added in community correspondence. And like I said, I'll have more in-depth thoughts and analysis on the themes over on my YouTube channel. I close my episodes out kind of thinking about the legacy of the game and final thoughts I have on it, right? Nothing I say, like I said earlier, will change the fact or the reality of what Chrono Trigger is. This game's legacy is already defined. I am not the sole arbiter or definer of its legacy, of its importance, whether I liked it or not. I came into this episode knowing that regardless of how I felt about it, this game is very important for the time period and for the medium of video games overall, because that's just how it's discussed and that's how its legacy is set. The legacy is already defined. It's not going to change by me putting out one little episode on it where I talk about Chrono Trigger for an hour when my friends have put out multi-hour analyses with guests about Chrono Trigger, and when this game has been discussed to death over the course of 30 years. It's widely agreed upon that Chrono Trigger is one of the greatest RPGs and greatest games ever made. My opinion is not going to change that. Nothing I say can take that away. I guess I can think of it like this. My top 10 list of games is incredibly personal to me. So the games that I consider my top 10 favorite of all time, when I engage in the somewhat dubious craft of top 10 creation, all those games have very strong emotional ties, very emotional attachments to me, and reasons beyond what they are as a video game that make them contenders for those spots. It's very, very rare that a game will come along to challenge any of them for a spot on that list because it goes beyond critical analysis. I still think about that, like, to this day, what constitutes my best games that I've ever played, my favorite games, that top 10 list that you must have. Chrono Trigger, for everything that it is, and for the legacy that it has, and for everything that I loved about it, and me not finding a single thing to have fault with it, I would say that it probably doesn't crack my top 10 right now for personal reasons, just because I don't have that extended emotional attachment to it that I have to literally all of those other games in my top 10. Chrono Trigger is one of the most impressive video games as a complete package that I think I have ever played. The music, the gameplay, the art direction, the graphical presentation, the narrative, everything about Chrono Trigger is so complementary that you can't imagine one thing existing without the other. It's such a perfect cohesion of all those different elements that I love about video games that I would say there are few examples of things that top it. It's brilliantly paced. It's surprisingly modern. It somehow manages to capture the spirit of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and Dragon Ball at the same time. I felt different elements of that throughout my playthrough, whether it's like the anime-ness of Dragon Ball and how anime Chrono Trigger can be sometimes, or the linear storytelling elements of Dragon Quest, or kind of the more fantastical elements like time travel and stuff of Final Fantasy. All that stuff blends together in a perfectly cohesive way in the backdrop of the world that Akira Toriyama created. And aside from Dragon Ball, I think Chrono Trigger is one of his lasting things that defines his legacy. I'm always hesitant to kind of heap praise and throw out superlatives and exclamations on a game, unless it's Kingdom Hearts, of course. I don't want to end this episode by just giving you the same thing and just being like, yeah, Chrono Trigger is the greatest thing ever made. It's the greatest RPG ever made. So if I had to pick a way to describe it, and I'm sure it's been described this way before, and I am not clever by coming up with this at all because I've seen different titles of essays talk about it in this way. I think the best way to describe Chrono Trigger would be timeless. I think timeless is the word that best describes it. It's something that probably shouldn't exist based on the forces that came together to make it happen, but it did happen. And I think it represents the best of this generation of video games as it begins to come to a close. The Super Nintendo is in the latter half of its lifespan. The PlayStation is on the market. The Nintendo 64 is coming down. 2 years from now, we have Final Fantasy VII. So I think Chrono Trigger is certainly the most representative example of RPGs at this time, before they would be changed forever with Final Fantasy VII. I think Chrono Trigger is kind of the culmination of all of the work that was done on the Super Nintendo in the realm of RPGs, in the realm of like the Super Nintendo artwork and sprite work that had been done. I would say that Chrono Trigger, and probably, although a game that I have not played all the way through yet, Final Fantasy VI are probably the most definitive examples of what this genre of game could be on this type of console. And I would certainly recommend Chrono Trigger to anybody that is even slightly curious about it. I think it's probably one of the more welcoming and forgiving RPGs of this era. I didn't struggle with it too much. I think it's very player friendly. It feels like a very modern RPG in a 30-year-old game. So I think if you were looking for a game other than Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest to experience what RPGs were like at this time, I think Chrono Trigger is probably the best example of what that is. Chrono Trigger is timeless, and it's probably one of the best made games I've ever played in terms of all the elements that come together to make it what it is. And I think with that, I'll leave my thoughts on Chrono Trigger there. Thank you guys so much for listening. As always, this was a big one. It was one that I was nervous and hesitant to talk about. I still struggle talking about it a little bit. You guys won't hear the unedited version, but there were a lot of pauses while I contemplated what I was saying and the way I wanted to say things, because I wanted to make sure I got it right in the way I wanted to tell it, because games of this stature deserve that. I at least want to, even if I had come away disliking the game or thinking it wasn't for me, I still would have had the positive historical outlook and context of Chrono Trigger based on like the research I did and the forces that came together to make it happen, because that just doesn't happen in video games anymore. You don't see, I would say that video games are a lot less like that, a lot less that creative force driven like that anymore. You don't see like these big names in video games like coming together, crossing company lines to come together and make a project like this. Like, just imagine if like Hideo Kojima and Hidetaka Miyazaki and Shigeru Miyamoto like all came together to make a video game. You don't see that. That's just never going to happen. I don't think that really happens to that level that it happened then anymore in this day and age. So yeah, I struggled. There were a lot of pauses. I cleaned it up in the editing so it sounds as cohesive as some of my stuff normally does, but this was a tough one to talk about. And I thank you guys for sticking through it and listening to it, because this was a really big one on my radar for a long time. If you'd like to see more of what's going on with the Unlockables, I would highly recommend going on over to linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. You can find all the links to social media there, to the Discord, to the Patreon, to the YouTube channel, as I referenced several times in this episode. There is a companion YouTube essay coming where I talk a lot more about the themes and the narrative of Chrono Trigger and the things that I kind of saw and the way that the game went about presenting its themes and the questions that it asks you. I'm really proud on that. It's one of my favorite things that I think I've ever written. And while I think I still can get better at writing, I think I'm going in the right direction for the way I'd like to do some more of my in-depth analysis, especially when it comes to YouTube stuff. So please go on over to there and check out the Unlockables YouTube channel and subscribe for more stuff like my Chrono Trigger essay. Now, with that being said, as always, remember, it's not just a story of video games, it's a story of you.
Yeah, Steve, stay cool here. Appreciate you taking my call. Though I shouldn't legally be anywhere near a podcast. But Chrono Trigger, it's a classic. Timelines, paradoxes. You know, it reminds me that one night, Radar calls me from a payphone. Collect. Now, some of you ain't never got a call at 3:17 a.m. from a man breathing heavy and whispering the words reversal and his shows. Because back then a collect call wasn't about conversation. It was a warning. Sometimes a code. a signal to grab your bolt cutters and bring your worst ideas. So anyway, Radar tells me he's found a kiosk at the Greendale Mall. Says it's full of time rocks, vibrating crystals that could punch a hole in the timeline. If we steal the right one, he says we can go back. We can fix what needs to be fixed. I ask him what he's trying to fix. And he just says, the canoe incident. And he just hangs up the phone. So we show up at the mall about midnight. I'm in crime mode, dark hoodie gloves, Monster Energy drink already open. And Radar, he's barefoot. Always barefoot. He got that same beat up copy of The Secret that he always carried around. I ain't never read it. I don't think he did either. But it was with him every time. Like a Bible, like it was his religion. Phasing through penitentiary walls. Anyway. We sneak in through the service hall behind Wetzel's Pretzels. The kiosk is lit up like a psychic's tax shelter. Fake amethyst, vibrating pendants, a sign that says ascension happens hourly. You know, it's a Radar. He starts grabbing these stones like he's Thanos and mumbling in reverse Spanish. I don't fucking know, it could have been regular Spanish. But anyway, I'm pocketing a necklace with a scorpion trapped in resin when bam, mall cop shows up. His rascal's sparking. He got a taser in one hand and a sage all bundled up in the other, yelling, "Drop the stones." And that's when I look over, the Radar's gone. Gone. Not hiding, not running, just erased. Look, Evan, I took the hit. I did about 8 months. County. Shared a cell with a guy named Cuddle, who thought Chrono Trigger was a government blueprint. The food wasn't so bad. And that toilet sang at night. And ended up getting out with a limp and 2 new phobias. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that mall cop screaming. I get that phantom vibration going. I'm feeling that lumpy time rock vibrating in my coat pocket. But maybe, sometimes I think maybe Radar made it, Evan. Maybe he's back in 87. Fixing the price of beef jerky because it's ridiculous. Or maybe he's the manager at the mall kiosk. I don't know. I never know. Anyway. Yep. That's it.